Hi, everybody. My name is Charlene Margot, and I'm co-founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture. We are delighted and honored to have with us today Dr. Lisa Damour, who's going to be talking to you about her new book, The Emotional Lives of Teenagers. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you so much. I'm very glad to be with you. And welcome to all of you. So today we're going to talk about the emotional lives of teenagers. And what I can tell you is that I've cared for teenagers and their families for about 30 years now. I got my PhD 27 years ago, and of course was caring for families while I was in my training. What I can say, having sort of been in this space for a long time, is that I don't know that I have seen a harder time to be a teenager or to raise a teenager. But I can also tell you that I feel hopeful about this. As hard as it is right now, what I also know is that one of our most clearly established research findings is that the strongest force for adolescent mental health is good relationships with caring adults. So teenagers having good working relationships with you, with other adults in their life, these are the things that really, really matter and make a big difference. And so as hard as things are right now, which is true, it is also true that the thing that actually exerts the most leverage on our care of teenagers is the thing that we ourselves can control. So we're going to talk about that relationship. We're going to talk about how to foster it. But before we get there, I actually want to take a moment to just unpack the phrase mental health. I've used it already, at least once. And it's a really important phrase. It's something we're talking about a lot right now. It's something our teenagers are talking about a lot right now. On the whole, it's a really good thing that we're talking about it, right? As a psychologist, of course I am glad that we are talking about it. The thing we want to be careful about, though, is how we're talking about it. And what I mean by this is that often when you hear people talk about mental health, they talk about it in a way that doesn't actually fit with how we understand it as psychologists. What I mean by this is that often being mentally healthy, if you're hearing about it in popular media, social media, often it's equated with feeling good or feeling calm or feeling relaxed. These are all really nice things. It's good to feel calm and relaxed and at ease. Those are not mental health. When psychologists walk up to the question of what mental health is, we're actually looking for two things. First, do the feelings fit the situation? Do they match what is actually happening? And then second, are they being managed well? So you can hear in our definition that we allow for distress. If you or your teenager are upset over upsetting things, you're having the right reaction. That's a sign of mental health. Really what matters is how those feelings get handled. So if we think about, right, a kid coming through, their day, let's say your kid's at school right now, and let's say, this isn't going to happen, but let's say it happens, that your kid has this wonderful, very close friend, the person they hang out with as much as they absolutely can. And let's say that today, while your kid's at school, that very close friend says, I have news. My family's moving. We're moving across the country this summer. Okay, so this is very bad news. Your kid is going to be really upset about this. And so when your kid comes home, you should fully expect that your kid is going to be sad, maybe angry about the fact that this kid is moving, anxious about who they're going to hang out with. You could probably fill in several other negative emotions, but your kid's going to be in emotional pain about this when they walk in the door. They should be. It's actually stranger if they're not upset, right? We expect to see negative emotions under these conditions. So in terms of mental health, like check the box, the presence of distress can be proof of mental health. This brings us to the second question. What do they do next? How do they handle their upset feelings? And on this one, the way we think about it as psychologists is they basically have two options. Either they can handle it in a way that brings relief and does no harm. Obviously, this is the option we want them to use. Or they can handle it in a way that brings relief, but comes at a cost. We want them to avoid this. So your kid's upset, they come home upset, They have every right to be upset. Their upset is a proof that they work perfectly. Then, if they get themselves on this road of doing things that bring relief and help them feel better, we're looking at the picture of mental health. Okay, what are the kinds of things that we see teenagers do? So some teenagers come home and they want to talk about how they're feeling, right? They may want to express their emotions. That's great. Not all teenagers want to talk. Often they don't want to talk. Some will want to, as one teenage girl said to me recently, force cuddle the cat, right? Go find comfort and just, comfort themselves with the family pet. Some will want to go for a run. Some will want to go watch a TV show that they like and just distracts them and helps themselves feel better. Some will want to put on a sad playlist and listen to their sad playlist to help themselves feel better. There's all sorts of things that teenagers do that could help them get to a place where they feel better at no cost. Again, that's the picture of mental health. The only thing we worry about is if they get on the road where they feel better in a way that has a price tag attached. So here we're talking the kid who comes home and maybe they're like, you know what, I'm miserable. We're all going to be miserable. Like, I'm just going to take this out on everybody for a week and a half, right? They don't have to be alone with it anymore, but it's not a great situation and it's hard on relationships. Other times kids will be like, why do bad things happen to me? Why is it always like this? And they have a sort of collapsing, anxiety-driven, depressing, falling in on themselves. We worry about that. Other kids might be like, you know what? I'm going to smoke a ton of weed until this feeling dies down, and that's my solution. Okay, this is a problem. Smoking marijuana will help them feel better. Obviously, this is not how we want them to handle the feeling. But when we look at the question of mental health in teenagers, what I want you to hear me say is that we are not looking for happy teenagers. It's great if your kid is happy. I want your kid to be happy. I want my kid to be happy, at least from time to time. What we're looking for is, do the feelings match the situation and are they handled well? Okay, so that's the teenager's job. Have feelings that fit the context, manage those feelings well. So if that's their job, what's our job? Okay, our job can be summed up actually in 2 words, but I want you to file this under easy to say, hard to do. So kid comes in the house, feeling upset, rightly so. Our job is to try to be a steady presence, to be available and steady and present to them. Okay. This is really hard to do. And I have a 13-year-old and a 20-year-old myself, and I'm very aware right now that I'm all around the country encouraging people to be a steady presence when their teenager is upset. And yet in my own house, I am routinely reminded of how hard this can be. And so I'm going to amend this a little bit. Our job is to try to be a steady presence or to try to fake being a steady presence. Because I feel like more than I wish it were true, I'm sometimes kind of faking it. But the point is that we are not overreactive and we are not unhelpful. Okay, let's take a minute and unpack a bit why it's so hard to be a steady presence, why I myself am so often faking steady presence. Okay, there's some reasons. One is that teenage emotions are incredibly intense. They're just super powerful. This is natural to adolescence. This is a part of being a teenager. One thing, this is sort of a fun aside, I put this up on my Instagram account. I was finally allowed to share a couple of weeks ago that for the last 4 years, I've been working on the new Inside Out 2 movie with Pixar. And if you saw Inside Out 1, you remember Riley, she's the main character. So she's now a teenager, she's 13 in Inside Out 2. And one of the things that movie captures so beautifully is the sudden amplification of everything she's feeling. So, that there were characters who were there before, things get louder. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful depiction. So this is true, this is natural to adolescence. Pixar does a great job with this topic, but that doesn't make it easy to be a steady presence when your kids' feelings are really powerful, really intense, and coming at you pretty fast. Another thing that makes it hard to be a steady presence is the unrelenting headlines about adolescent mental health, a lot of sort of fear that is out there in the media about their mental health. It's been a lot, right? I mean, it started in the pandemic. It is continuing with much strength. All of these, I think, can be very destabilizing and make us very anxious about our kids. And if you're anxious, you're not being a steady presence. So to help us be a steady presence, part of what I want to do is actually think with you about when to worry. Because one of the things I've learned in my work is that if I can articulate when it's time to worry, that usually helps us to feel more calm. There can be a sense of like, okay, there's the line. We're not at or over the line. You know, maybe things are just in the garden variety of teenage stuff. So in terms of when to worry, there are a few things I want you to watch for with your teenagers. First, I don't want you to worry if your teenager's mood is like up and down and up and down. That is typical adolescence. That is absolutely what we expect to see. Instead, I want you to worry if your teenager's mood goes to a dark or a worrisome place and hangs out there, spends time there. That is pretty unusual. We do not expect to see teenagers who are really dark or really low or really cranky or really blank. 36 hours is a long time. 24 hours can be a long time, you know, for some kids. So I want you to watch for that. I also want you to watch for what we call costly coping. This is what I described. They're coping, but they're coping in a way that causes its own problems. So they're hard on themselves. They're hard on others. They're using substances. They may be engaged in self-harm. I mean, there's ways that kids cope that do provide some immediate relief, but are obviously not how we want them to be coping over time. The other thing I want to just address really, really directly are worries about things like suicide. We have a lot of headlines about that. It is very hard as a parent not to feel incredibly anxious around this topic, whether it's in the news or not. It's something that parents of teenagers worry about. And on this one, I want you to know we have total consensus as a field about how we want you to handle this. So what we know as clinicians is that if there is a reason to be concerned that a teenager may not be safe with themselves, the best thing you can do is to just ask. And the way we would have you say it would be something like, look, you know, because you got to give them some context. You know, you've been in your room for 2 days, or you haven't seemed like yourself, or, you know, you were so upset about that thing. I need to ask you a question. Have you had any thoughts of harming yourself or ending your life? So just ask very, very directly. So this is our guidance. We're in agreement about this guidance. It still is hard to think about doing. And usually the reason that adults are reluctant to do this is they're scared they're going to give the kid the idea that the kid was upset and they weren't thinking about suicide, and then I mention it and now they're thinking about it. Here's what I can tell you. Number one, teenagers know what suicide is. We're not introducing this concept. Number two, and this is so important, if a young person is thinking about hurting themselves, we have research showing that they're glad you asked. So it's important that we do this. And I will tell you, this is the advice. I've always, you know, I was trained by this way. I have, you know, done my work this way. I had something happen at this point, it was like 3 or 4 months ago, in a meeting like this that was so important and so useful, and I want to share it with you. So I shared the guidance I just shared with you on a Zoom call with a school community. And in the chat, a dad sent me a private message and he said, I was that teenager. And it would have meant so, so much to me if somebody had asked me if I was thinking about hurting myself, because it would have let me know that they could see how much pain I was in. Incredibly generous for this man to share this. And so I feel like I want to share his generosity because it really just reinforces the importance of, you know, asking this question if you've got worries. Okay, that's the scariest thing. We've covered it. You know when to worry, you know how to handle the scariest thing. does that make it easier for us to be a steady presence with our kids? I would like to think it does. And yet we come up against something else. And this something else that we come up against, I think is like the most universal and kind of core feature of being a parent or caregiver. And it's this, which is we hate to see our kids in pain. Full stop, right? If you love your kid, you hate to see them in pain. This is incredibly natural to being a parent or caregiver. And I don't know that I really appreciated how powerful that instinct was until I became a parent myself. And I remember when my girls were little, like if they'd have one of those like terrible colds that they get sometimes, and their nose is running and they're coughing and they're really gross. I remember looking at my girls and thinking, I would rather have your cold than watch you have your cold. Like it is so awful to watch you suffer through it. I would rather have the cold myself. And of course, eventually you do have their cold, but like I didn't, all the same. I remember thinking, I have never looked at anybody else in my whole life and thought I would like to have your cold, right? Only my own kids. And so I think, if we go back to that moment of the kid has bad news during the day and they hold it together and they come in the house and they are really upset. If we go back to that moment, the thing that makes it really hard to be a steady presence is we want them to not be unhappy. We don't want them to be in pain. And this is a really powerful and important instinct in parenting. And it really can lead us to do things like reassure them and make phone calls and promise we'll help get them together with that kid a lot. Do all of those things which are so loving and so kind and so not steady presence. So part of being a steady presence, a huge part of being a steady presence, is actually fighting this instinct that we have within ourselves. Okay. So to fight this instinct, which is not so easy, I'm going to give us some reasons, and I really mean us, because I have to remind myself of this all the time. I'm going to give us some reasons why it's actually useful for our kids to feel emotional discomfort. And it's sort of a strange case to make as a psychologist, right? You would think I would be on the side of our kids not feeling discomfort, but there's true value in it. And I think knowing the true value of it can help us be a steady presence. So one thing, I've said it, but I'm going to say it again. Often their discomfort is proof that they work perfectly. It's a sign of their mental health, right? If your kid's best friend is moving away, they should be upset. If your kid has a giant test tomorrow and has not started studying, your kid should be anxious, right? That is a good thing. If someone is mean to your kid should be hurt and they should probably be mad. All of these are negative emotions. All of these are exactly proof that our kids work perfectly. And I will tell you as a mother, this one helps me, that when my daughters are dealing with some painful emotion and they're sharing it with me, if I can slow myself down and think, does it fit? Is it appropriate to the moment? So far, the answer has always been yes. It makes it a lot easier for me to be steady with it and to allow it, right? We don't want to allow it, but we have to allow it. Another reason why it's important to make space for negative emotions is that negative emotions, actually all emotions, are informational. That's their job. Their job is to actually guide us in our lives. So stuff that feels good tells us we should probably do more of that. Stuff that feels bad, that's good information too. So if you have a kid who every time they hang out with a particular classmate, your kid feels terrible after that, your job in those conditions is not to help your kid feel better. Your job in those conditions is to help your kid reflect on the fact that it feels bad and then maybe not hang out with that kid so much. So we need to make space for negative emotions because they're important as part of life. Another reason why it's really important that we make space for negative emotions is that they help kids grow. They actually are a big part of how kids mature. getting through hard things, going through hard things. Every one of us can point to something hard that we went through, that we would rather not have gone through it. And yet, as a result of going through it, we are more empathic, we are more broad-minded, we cherish our, opportunities more, that there's value and benefit of going through hard things. And here I think about, I'm in my office where I take care of kids. And years and years ago, I had a 15-year-old boy in my practice. And he was here because he'd been caught cheating at school. And he had legit cheated, like there was no question he had done it. And his school and his parents did a really amazing job of making him face the consequences for his choice. Okay, I was one of the consequences for his choice, so he was stuck here with me. And I remember one day we're sitting there, he's on this couch right behind me, and we're talking, and he looks out that window and gets this really far away look, and he's like, I never want to feel like this again. And I was like, wow, like right there in front of me. I am watching this kid grow up on the back of getting through something hard. I mean, become more moral on the back of getting through something hard. Okay, so those are several reasons why we want to make room for negative emotions. There's one more big, this is like the reason of all reasons. Our ability to tolerate negative emotions in our kids is the thing, like the thing that builds their ability to tolerate negative emotions in themselves. That's why we have to be able to do it. Okay. To put it another way, the kid who has a bad day and gets bad news and comes in the house full of adolescent angst and pouring it out towards us, they are watching us and watching our reaction. And if we can be a steady presence, what we are communicating is, I can withstand this, and I think you can withstand this too. If we leap into action, if we're fixing and reassuring and questioning and changing, we're basically saying, I can't do this, I don't think you can do this. They need to believe they can do this. They need to believe that they don't have to be frightened of negative emotions. Okay, why do they need to believe this? They need to believe this because this is what opens up the whole world to them. This is what makes the whole world available to them. And what I mean by that is that everything worth doing in life has uncertainty and actually unpleasantness within it, right? And the kids who know that they can manage that, they can do those things. So, I think about, here we are, we're coming towards the summer, maybe some of your kids are like, all right, I want to sign up for this summer program, but I don't know anybody there. I might get lonely when I'm there. Okay. If they know that they can withstand some loneliness, they can sign up for the program and see how it goes. You may have a kid who wants a job and has heard that one of the bosses is kind of a jerk, right? But they really want the job. And if your kid knows, you know what, I can deal with a difficult boss, it won't be fun for me, but I can take it, they can sign up for the job. We need our kids to feel that it is within their capacity to manage negative emotions. And we're going to come to the question of managing them, but they don't have to just live with them and sit in a soup of negative feelings. That's not what we want. But they need to know that they can do it, and they need to know that we believe they can do it. The flip of this, and this is something I'm seeing more and more, is I've cared for kids who are frightened of discomfort. And what happens is they start to want to have guarantees that they will not be uncomfortable, like that they'll do a program if they know it's going to be great, or they'll consider a job if it's going to be great. We can't make those kinds of guarantees. Anything good, you don't know. Should be great. It will have downsides. And so kids who are like, you know what, I can take it. I have ways to manage. They can do all sorts of things. Kids who are scared or don't believe they can manage painful emotions don't get to do as much. Okay, so let's say we're all in agreement that we're making room for negative emotions in our kids for all of these good, important reasons. Okay, here's where it gets a lot better. Like I said, this is not about them just sitting in painful emotions. This is about them managing those well, right? The second part of the definition of mental health. So We're going to spend the rest of our time on how do teenagers manage feelings well? How do we help teenagers manage feelings well? Something that's really critical as we come to this question of managing feelings well is that when psychologists get to this topic, right, managing emotions, we think in two categories. Sometimes you manage feelings by expressing them. Kids will say often like getting them out. And sometimes you manage feelings by taming them, quieting them, bringing them back under control. Now, what's important is that in the eyes of psychologists, these are both important, like they're equally valuable. We don't prefer one over the other. I say this because in the culture right now, we are really into expressing, getting kids talking about feelings. And this is valuable, but it's not the end all be all. And whenever I do an interview, I get questions like, so Dr. Damour, like, how do we help teenagers talk about feelings, right? This is a fair question. I try to answer the question, but whenever I get it, I have this like moment, like a flashback almost to 20 years and like almost exactly 6 months ago, when I was hugely pregnant with my first daughter, my first kid. And I had been practicing as a psychologist for a while, and I was going on maternity leave. I was in a meeting with senior colleagues. I was sort of packing my bag. I was saying my goodbyes, and I was almost out the door. And one of my senior colleagues, Debbie, who I love, she was like, Lisa, do you want me to tell you how psychologists mess up their kids? I was like, yes, I have seen those kids. I know exactly what you're talking about. And she said, they talk about feelings too much. And as soon as she said it, I was like, oh yeah, I could totally see that. And I'm picturing like, the kid who's having the meltdown and the psychologist parent who's like, oh, I see you're having a big mad feeling right now. You could easily picture it. And while I'm imagining all of this, she says, there comes a time in parenting where we say to kids, all right, you've been upset for a while. What's going to help you feel better? And that was it. Like she just, in that kind of throwaway line, captured, you've been upset, you've expressed a while, not helping. What's going to help you tame? What's going to help you feel better? So we think in both of those ways. So we're going to talk about how we help teenagers do this. Let me take a minute on how they do it themselves. And I will tell you, this is what I have learned in caring for teenagers. Anytime you get to the question of like, how do I help a teenager do fill in the blank? The first thing you want to ask is, how does the teenager do it? Like left to their own devices, how do they accomplish this same thing? So starting with expression. A lot of teenagers are just going to tell you how they feel. They're going to just walk up, right, 9 o'clock at night and be like, hi, I feel anxious, afraid, frustrated, mad, fill in the blank. They will just use, as we say, verbalization to talk about and express feelings. This is a wonderful thing. This is exactly what we want. Now, for me, I'm not proud of this, but like the great irony, I think, as we spend all day, like, how do we get kids to talk about feelings? And it's so important to talk about feelings. There are plenty of times at 9 o'clock at night when I'm like headed to try to like catch, maybe finally watch the end of Curb Your Enthusiasm. And then I get intercepted by a teenager who's like, hi, I want to talk about feelings, or I feel this, I feel that. I wish it were true that I was like, excellent. Verbalization is the high art of expression. Usually I'm like, really? Like right now? I wasn't really expecting this. And so I think we have to own that. At least I try to own that we want teenagers to talk about their feelings, but when they do, we're often trying to get them to not talk so much about the feeling or not have that feeling so much. So here's how I help myself at 9 o'clock at night, if it should be helpful to you. We have really good research showing that the minute you say a feeling word, you feel less of that feeling. So the minute you say, I feel anxious, you feel less anxious. The minute you say, I feel mad, you feel less mad. So for me, the 9 o'clock play, when the kid is like, hi, I feel anxious, afraid, whatever, fill it in, is to listen and to empathize. Just be like, oh man, I am so sorry. 97.6% of the time, I'm making numbers up. That's all they want. They want to be heard and they want empathy. Full stop. That's all they want. I will also tell you that is the all-time steady presence move. If you just offer pure empathy, nothing else, that is mostly the most steady present thing you can do, because you're very present, right? You're empathizing with the emotion they have, and you're very steady. You're not doing anything else. No phone calls, no questions, no fix it, no reassurance. You're just empathizing. So I would have you start there. Okay, so that's if they're verbalizing as a form of expression. One of the things I love about writing my books is I learn a lot. And I can tell you, I would say the biggest learning takeaway for me in writing this most recent book is having so much more, I will say at this point, reverence for how teenagers express emotion in ways that don't involve words. They use their bodies. There are a lot of kids who, like, they take it to sports practice and get it out. Um, they kick a ball really hard. They play basketball to blow off steam. All of that is fantastic. Um, they love their music. They love their music. I mentioned a sad playlist earlier. I could talk about this for an hour. Teenagers have playlists. Many of them have playlists with feelings names attached. And they curate these very carefully. And then they go listen to the playlist that matches the feeling they're having. I had a teenage boy tell me about a playlist called Grr for when he was angry, listens to it. And we have research showing that listening to the playlists that match negative moods actually intensifies the mood and speeds your way out of it. Really powerful, really effective. All of this is expression, but not always something we recognize enough. Okay, so they express in lots of ways. They also tame. They do a really good job with this. So sometimes teenagers tame using comforts. They do this a lot. So I mentioned cuddling a pet. They will go take a shower. A lot of them, when I ask teenagers how they help themselves after a bad day, they'll be like, oh, I get back in bed, right? They just like love to snuggle in their beds. They like comfort foods. They like sometimes an elaborate facial situation to help themselves feel better. I know that this skincare situation is a little much these days. Here's where I'm at on it. There are a lot of ways teenagers can take the edge off. I have cared for a lot of teenagers over a long time. They can also smoke tons of weed, or they can have, a skincare situation. All things considered, I'll take skincare. But they comfort themselves and they help themselves feel better. And it's wonderful to watch. They also use distractions, which are not inherently bad, but it's complicated for teenagers. So the deal on distractions is that a little bit's fine. All of us use distractions. I certainly do all day to get through frustrations. So I'll be working on a piece of writing. I'll get to some paragraph I wrote that's terrible. I'll hate it. I'll be working on it more. I'll be close to slamming my computer shut. But if I just do a little internet shopping just for a few minutes, I can go back and work. All right. This is me. This is, I think, many, many of us. Our teenagers do the same. They start to get frustrated and they seek a distraction. What's tricky for them is they'll often go to algorithmically driven platforms. These are designed to be impossible to pull away from, right? The algorithms have a ton of data on us and our kids, and they use that data to put in front of us or our kids really, really irresistible content. So kids end up spending longer than they mean to. This is not willpower. This is not character. That's not what it's about. It's basically, our kids versus all of Silicon Valley. In terms of talking with teenagers about this, the way I tend to do it is I say, look, it's not the distraction. Distractions can be fine as a way to tame an emotion. It's the dosing, right? You want enough that you get the relief you're looking for. You don't want so much that you cause a new problem, right? You haven't done what you meant to, you spent too long, whatever it is. Okay, so they express, they tame. Now we come in on this. So starting with expression. When I think about teenagers and expression, I think in two categories. kids who are talkers, kids who are not talkers. Okay, the talkers are easy. They're already expressing, right? Like that's just happening. And like I said, start with empathy. It's almost always what they're looking for. It's almost always what they need. The non-talkers are trickier. But one thing I will say about the non-talkers is that having parented through this with a talker and a non-talker, what I feel like I discovered is that the non-talkers are talkers just on kind of at wildly inconvenient times. And I discovered this with my older daughter. She would come home from school, we'd be at dinner. I'd say, "How was school?" And she'd say, "Fine." And I'd say, "What happened?" And she'd say, "Nothing." I'd be like, "Okay." And then like cut to 10 p.m. I'm in bed, I've got my book, I'm shutting everything down. It's the end of the day. And then suddenly she would be standing like right next to me, like talk, 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 like telling me all sorts of things. And I was like, this is interesting. And then I started talking about this in public, and then I realized this is common. Like lots of kids are doing this. And then I was like, okay, so this is important. And so here's what I am sure the deal is here. So we know that teenagers are organized around autonomy. That is the nature of being a teenager. And so at dinner, when I say, "How was school? What happened?" She is, I am the one calling the meeting, and I am the one setting the agenda. Okay. And she's like, "I don't have to come to this meeting," which she doesn't. And she's also probably like, "I did meetings like this all day," which she did. So if she waits until nighttime when I've sort of shut things down, and then she comes in and starts talking, first of all, she's called the meeting. I didn't even know we were having a meeting. And second of all, she is setting the agenda. It's what she wants to talk about. And this is so true that I've even had teenagers say to me, "At night, my parents, like, they don't ask so many questions late at night." And they don't bring up new topics, right? And this is all true. This is all true. And then if I do start right, asking too many questions or bringing up new topics, all she has to do is say like, "I'm gonna let you sleep." Out she goes, done for the day. Again, in control of it. So what I've really come to appreciate is all teenagers want to connect with us. Some make it easy, some make it hard. But even the ones who make it a little hard, who want to talk at odd hours, what I think they're doing is really figuring out a kind of elegant solution to the problem of wanting to be connected and wanting to be really independent. I'm talking to people I know who've already sent a kid away off to college or who's left home to go do something else. They're not with us that long. So if it's inconvenient, I would encourage you to work with it. If it's too late at night, I would get in bed earlier. They want to connect. We want to be available to that. Okay. Then there's the taming. So expressing, helping them express, taming. We can comfort our kids. Our kids all have things that they like. Some of your kids, it's takeout from a favorite place. Some of your kids, it's rewatching, movies, TV shows, things that they, just like go to for comfort. If your kid is upset and doesn't feel like talking, consider offering comforts. If you're not sure what to offer when a kid's upset, the line that has probably gotten me through more parenting pinches is to say, "Is there anything I can do that won't make things worse or that might help you feel better?" That goes very far. I think one of the trickiest dynamics in parenting, teenagers especially, is comforting a kid who won't tell you what's wrong. This happens. I think we can feel like, "I can't help until you tell me what's wrong. I'm here to tell you, you can comfort your kid without knowing what's wrong." And I've actually asked teenagers about this, like, what gets in the way of telling adults what the problem is? Like, we can see that you're upset. Like, why won't you tell? And they've given me many excellent reasons. I'll give you one. This was so compelling. It was a junior girl, and she said, You know, by the time I get home, I'm like 90% of the way over it. Like rehashing the whole thing for my folks, that's not going to help me feel better, which is a completely reasonable thing to say. So be open, I think, to comforting your kid without knowing what's wrong. They sometimes have reasons for not sharing. In terms of helping kids be able to tame and quiet emotions, the number one asset, and I'm going to open up a huge can of worms here right at the end, is sleep. Sleep is the glue that holds human beings together. We know this as parents and caregivers, right? I mean, the minute your kid, your minute your toddler misses a nap, you're like, oh man, like the afternoon's going to be awful, right? The evening's going to be awful. The kid's going to be a mess. Same with teenagers, right? If they haven't slept enough, they do not handle emotions as well as they could. So think about the barriers to sleep for your kid, if there are some. Kids need much more sleep than we think they do. Teenagers, high schoolers on average need 9 hours. They need somewhere between 8 and 10 hours of sleep. Middle schoolers on average need 10 hours, somewhere between 9 and 11. Elementary and younger need 11 hours or more. One of the big barriers to sleep is technology. If I were calling all the shots, I would not have any tech in any kid's room ever, and certainly not overnight. This is easy to set up. It's hard to walk back. We have a lot of data on sleep and mental health, and it's very, very clear that disrupted sleep is connected to mental health problems. I know there's a lot of conversation right now about social media and mental health. Those data are less clear, but if you run it through sleep, if technology is disrupting sleep, there's full agreement in my field that that's a major issue. If your kid has tech in their room and you don't think it's a problem, which happens, right? I mean, kids who just manage it well, ignore it, fall asleep quickly, sleep soundly, use it as an alarm. I'm not going to tell you to make a big issue of it. If you have reason to think that your kid's tech is keeping them up at night, you can either say it's coming out or it cannot keep you up if you want it to stay in there. So I think that's a fight worth having. Sleep is so essential and so important. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up here and let me just say this. Our kids are going to get upset. This is just a done deal. And we have to be not just accepting of that, but actually okay with it. Like really, strangely, even welcoming of it. And the reason I want you to be welcoming, it's a very strange thing to argue for, but the reason I want you to be welcoming of your kid getting upset is that every time your kid gets upset in front of you, you get a chance to see how are they coming along with managing negative emotions? Do they have good strategies for handling this well? Can I help them develop good strategies for handling this well? And you could really assess this like critical question for like parenting and also thinking about kids leaving home is when my kid comes up against a negative emotion, do they have the skill set they need for managing those feelings well? And as you can start to say yes to that, you can feel really good about the skill set your kid has now and the skill set that they're going to be using for the rest of their lives. So thank you. All right, Charlene, come on back. I'd love to do some questions.
Oh, thank you, Lisa. That was amazing. You've given so much to think about, and not surprisingly, we have amazingly good questions coming in.
Okay.
Lots of them. So let's see how we can do. I get to start with one of my own questions because that's the rules here. I make the rules. It seems like, Dr. Damour, over the past decade or so, we've seen more parents who are literally afraid of their children, afraid of offending them, afraid of setting limits. Why do you think that is? Where did this fear of our kids come from?
Mm. I know what you're talking about. What I would say is it's a fear of our kid getting upset. Like,
Yes.
yeah, it's a fear of that. And that I will say, what I started with, like that there is this idea out there that mental health is about feeling good.
Mhm.
The flip of it is distress is a evidence of a mental health concern,
Yeah.
right? That's wrong. But I see how people get then to thinking, I don't want my kid to be in distress because distress is proof that something's really wrong. And so I have to stand between my kid and distress, and I can't cause distress in my kid. We've become, as a culture, scared of negative emotions. And the media has not helped this one bit. And one thing I will tell you is how often I see headlines where they have equated distress and mental health concern. They haven't uncoupled those. I'll give you a really good example. That CDC report, it was a year plus ago, got tons and tons of coverage. There was a question about, have you felt sad or hopeless for 2 weeks or more in the last year? It got a ton of media press. That question was asked in September 2021. Okay. A lot of kids said yes.
Yes.
Because they were a year into a global pandemic. And have you felt sad or hopeless for 2 weeks or more in the last year? So much so that it interfered with your activities? Like kids were like, yes, yes. It was it was announced as signs of terrible things for kids. Now, of course, for some of those kids, it was a sign of terrible things. I'm not saying it was nothing, but the kids were sad in the pandemic should not be a headline suggesting that they were harmed psychologically by the pandemic. And so emotional pain and harm have become equated. And
Yeah.
so then if I say to you, you can't go to that party and you get upset, I am now scared I have hurt you, as opposed to you're pissed at me and you'll get over it, right? So I really have a lot of empathy for families because they're in an environment that has made them feel like it's bad for kids to feel pain, emotional pain.
And I think the kids have bought into it. Teenagers talking about, I'm having a mental health crisis. No,
You're
you're
having a bad day.
because your boyfriend broke up with you or your friend is moving.
Yep.
I'm half Canadian. We were brought up not to take ourselves too seriously.
I live in the Midwest. Same deal.
Same deal, right? So this is
Yeah,
kind of like,
I
ah,
hear you. And yet I have so much empathy for it because it is the media soup in which we find ourselves, in which parents find themselves, in which kids find themselves. And it's again, I mean, I'm so excited about this movie Inside Out too, because one of the things they did so beautifully in the first movie, and they've turned around and done so beautifully in the second movie, is to say fear, sadness, anger, these are part of the programming of being human. These are all on board for a reason. They are protective and valuable. These are not anomalies that need to be shut down. So that kind of messaging, like we've never needed it more.
okay. So we're going to turn to a couple things here that are more serious. Let's start with the one question that I think is super important, Lisa, because you've addressed this. How should a parent respond if their child confirms that they have had thoughts of self-harm or suicide?
I'm really glad somebody asked this. So what I would recommend is to say, is it something you've thought about, or is it something you've thought you really might do?
Mhm.
Because lots of kids think about it. We've known this for years. I mean, if you go back in the data on like, have you ever had thoughts of suicide? Like kids have endorsed that at very high rates for a long, long time. Because I mean, I'm not like I remember being 17 and being so mad at my mom, and I was like, oh, if I ran out into traffic right now, like I mean, it was a thought. It was just a thought. And so it's important to not overreact to just a thought.
Mhm.
And so to say, is it something you've thought about, or is it something you thought you really might do? Can give you some room. You should also have this phrase on hand if your kid's like, oh my God, I could kill myself, right? Like kids say stuff like that. And it's terrifying when they say stuff like that. And again, in that moment to say, wait, I heard that. Is that something you know, it's something you just thought right now, or is that something you've really been thinking about, or you think you really might do? Most kids will be like, no, 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 I didn't mean it that way, right? I mean, it just came out that way. They have big feelings. So the thought itself, I would take it seriously. And here's what I would say. If the kid says, no, 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 I'm just thinking about it. I thought it. I'm not thinking about doing it.
Mhm.
Then I think you say, that must have been upsetting to have that thought. And what were the context in which you had that thought, and what was going on that your mind even went there? So take very, very seriously that it's like an index of like, they were very distressed.
Mhm.
And take that distress very seriously, get to the bottom of where it's coming from, make sure it gets addressed. Um, it's not the case where the kid goes, I just thought it, and you're like, okay, then great, never mind. Right. I mean, like you go for it, but you don't. But if the kid says, no, it's something I've thought I really might do, you are calling your pediatrician, you are taking that kid to an ER, you are on it. But
Mhm.
there is a little space between kids thinking about it and kids thinking about actually acting on it.
All right, and parents, I want you to really hear Dr. Damour when she says this, because it's true. We know from the research that saying it to kids doesn't make them want to do it.
Yep.
That's an important distinction. Okay, so we have some questions, needless to say, from parents, especially of boys who are like, they come home, they go to their room, they don't talk, they sleep, but they seem otherwise happy. Is that okay?
Yes. Yes. It is. Again, they have lots of ways to manage feelings that are highly adaptive that do not involve talking with us about their feelings. Boys will talk to their friends. Boys will talk to their girlfriends sometimes if they're heterosexual. That's often, there can be very, very deep and intimate relationships, that are their romantic relationships, or where boys are taking their conversations about how they feel. They will play sports to get their feelings out. They will play video games to get their feelings out. They will watch YouTube shorts to distract themselves to feel a little bit better. As long as they have variety, and as long as it's not coming at the cost of anything else, it's okay. I will say, in terms of them being in their room, this is another reason why I'm not a fan of phones and tech going in rooms. If you take your phone and tech in your room, you have no reason to ever leave your room, right? So I think, to the degree that we want to be able to lay eyes on our teenagers, having that stuff used in public spaces is a good idea.
I hear you. I had a very chatty son, and he had a friend who talked never. And that kid's mother used to borrow my child and drive around with him.
So that kid would talk to your son.
No, she'd just take my son, just so she had a boy to talk to.
That's
I'm-
so
It happens. It happens.
sweet.
All right. Here, this is a great question. If we see our child being treated poorly by a friend, but our child does not seem to feel bad afterwards, should we be concerned?
It's a really interesting question. I'll tell you how I would answer it, which is, to the degree that there's a conflict about this kid mistreating your child, you don't want the conflict between you and your kid, right? You don't want it to be like, why do you let them treat you like that? And then your kid's like, you don't understand, that kid's super fun, which they also probably are. That is often the case. And then now you're at this with your kid. You want the conflict to be between your kid and your kid. And so you say, I saw how, that kid treated you. Didn't look so great. Help me understand, like, are there things I don't see? Is there another side to this? Like, you, is there something here you enjoy? Like, I don't think I probably have the whole picture, right? Because you probably don't, right? And there are things like, what draws you to that person who doesn't treat you in a way that you and I both know you deserve to be treated? What draws you to them? What you're trying to foster is this kid being like, I have a dilemma. This kid is fun, or I feel drawn to them, or they're part of a network of kids that I don't want to leave, and they sometimes treat me badly. This is my dilemma to sort out, but it's not a fight with my parent.
And sometimes they just figure it out. When my daughter was in high school, there was a girl who I was worried about, we were worried about, and I was just about to say to her, we really don't want you to spend time with X, Y, and Z. 3 days later, she and her girlfriends walked in and they're like, yeah, we're not hanging out with her anymore.
Yep. No, they have to find their own solutions.
And they often do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Often do. All right, another question about kind of what parents can do. A good question. Given teenagers' emotional reactivity, how do you gauge when they're veering into overreaction or overreaction that needs some addressing?
Oh, so I think it's a question of recovery. Teenagers by their nature overreact. They're neurologically primed to do so. It's not their fault. So I think the question is, when they're having a big emotional eruption, does anything, is there any harm done? Are they punching walls? Are they, doing damage? That's the time to go get your kids some help. But if they have their big eruption and then they find ways to re-regulate, they go watch some TV, they go for a run, they pull it together, that's adolescence. But if they can't recover, you want to get some help.
Okay. And I'm going to ask you one last question, then give you a minute for some final remarks. I love this question. What do you do if your kid gets upset and says mean things to you? Should you correct them or direct them to express their negative feelings a different way?
It's a great question. Okay. Here's the thing I think is almost always true, and I think you should assume to be true. Usually, by the time the words are out of the kid's mouth, they already regret it, right? Their feelings are powerful. These are teenagers. They are awesome at school all day. We could not make it through their school days. You know, they hold it together. They're super gracious, and they come in the house, and then we say something, and then they like they don't hold it together. So as a first response, I think it's really valuable to say something like, I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that. Or I don't think that came out the way you wanted it to, or excuse me, or well, why don't you take that again? Or something that's basically like, I am noting this, I'm not allowing this, but I'm also not going to make a big thing of it and derail us on something that you may already regret. So I would start there. I would say 90% of the time, if not more, kids are like, yeah, sorry, right? And begin again. Your kid's like, no, right? And they really go at you hard. Then I think you say, you can't talk to me like that. Like, we're not doing this. And I have a podcast called Ask Lisa, the Psychology of Parenting. And with my phenomenal co-host, Rena Ninen, and we answer parenting questions. And I think it's next week's episode is, what do I do with my angry son? And we really unpack a kid who is just really, really being rough at home, and really unpack like how you go down, like if the kid is not backing down, like how you handle this as a parent in a way that sets boundaries and is fair and realistic, but doesn't actually exacerbate the situation.
Okay, we're gonna have to highlight that one, Lisa. That sounds like a great one. So an hour with you has just flown by, Dr. Damour, and I just want to give you a minute to tell us sort of your final thoughts for parents. You've given us so much good advice today, but parting thoughts.
Oh, that's so lovely. I mean, what I would just say is take really good care of yourselves. This is enormously hard. Even when things are going well, parenting is challenging by its nature. You taking good care of yourself is part of how you take care of your kids. If you're struggling with your own coping, if you're feeling lousy in your own life, that doesn't help your kids. So I don't want people to feel like they're being selfish if they care for themselves. Taking care of yourself is how you care for your kid.
Thank you, Dr. Damour. Perfect words to end with. And thank you, everybody, for being with us. What a great audience today. And all the wonderful questions. I wish we could have answered them all, but Lisa, we'll keep your resources in our newsletter. And really, we're so grateful to you for an amazing event today. Thank you, thank you. And parents, look, this is a wonderful book, super readable. Look at all those hearts. This is a great thing. Pick up The Emotional Lives of Teenagers. Thank you again, Dr. Lisa Moore. Take care, everybody. Hope to see you again soon. Bye for now.